For almost 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were the dream Hollywood elegance intertwined with Nashville soul. She was the Oscar-winning actress. He was the country boy who found fame with his guitar. Together they seemed untouchable. But behind the smiles and award nights, something fragile was breaking. Now court filings reveal the unthinkable. After 19 years of marriage, Nicole filed for divorce. The story everyone thought was a fairy tale has quietly come to an end. Nicole Mary Kidman's story begins far from the spotlights. Born in Honolulu to Australian parents who returned home shortly after. In Sydney, she grew up a shy girl with a gentle voice and vivid imagination. Teachers worried about her silence, but in her mind, entire worlds were alive. She found her voice not through words but through characters. Ballet led to drama classes, drama led to theater. And by her teenage years, directors had started to notice the fragile intensity she brought to her performances. Then came BMX Bandits, her breakout film in the early 80s. It wasn't glamorous, but it showed Hollywood what Australia already knew. Nicole Kidman was a force of nature waiting to be unleashed. Her beauty drew attention, but her depth kept it. By her mid-20s, Hollywood had called, and with that, fate introduced her to Tom Cruise, her first great love and heartbreak. Their marriage in 1990 seemed like the perfect union, but reality behind the cameras was more complicated. Tom's faith in Scientology created invisible walls around their lives. When they divorced in 2001, Nicole didn't just lose her husband, she lost her family. Her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor, became distant under the influence of the church. Friends say that loss haunted her. She felt like a mother cut off from her own heart. So when she met Keith Urban years later, it wasn't just romance. It was a second chance to build the home she'd once dreamed of. Keith Lionel Urban was born in Whangarei, New Zealand, and raised in Queensland, Australia. His roots were humble. His father ran a corner store. His mother kept the home, and country music played on repeat. His first guitar came at age 6. By 8, he was performing on small stages, a boy with big dreams in a genre that barely existed in Australia. Country music was his compass. It told stories of pain, redemption, and all the emotions he couldn't say aloud. But behind his charm was a storm. Keith's teenage years were wild. Bars, late nights, and an unrelenting hunger to prove himself. Fame in Nashville came, but with it came the darker side. Addiction, loneliness, and the impossible chase for perfection. When Keith met Nicole at a 2005 event honoring Australians in the arts, something shifted. She wasn't just another celebrity. She saw through the chaos. Nicole brought serenity to his storm, and he brought music back into her life. They married in 2006 in Sydney, surrounded by candlelight. For years they seemed to defy Hollywood's odds, a genuine partnership rooted in love and healing. From glamorous premieres to heartwarming interviews, they projected unity. Nicole often said Keith's love healed her scars. Keith publicly thanked her for saving his life during rehab. Yet even fairy tales have shadows. Time, distance, and fame can erode the strongest foundations. Nicole's global acting schedule and Keith's touring life meant months apart. Rumors of emotional distance grew, though both denied trouble. Then, this year, their silence spoke volumes. Nicole filed for divorce after nearly 19 years. Sources close to her said she didn't do it lightly, that she'd fought long and hard to preserve what they'd built. When Keith stepped onto stage days later, fans noticed no wedding ring, no songs about love. Even his lyrics, once filled with Nicole's name, had changed. The message was clear. The love story had run its course. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban weren't just 2 stars crossing paths. They represented hope. 2 people from the same corner of the world who conquered fame, heartbreak, and fate together. Now, as they stand apart, perhaps their story isn't about losing love, but finding strength in letting go. Because sometimes even the most beautiful songs end. And what matters most is the silence that follows. The space to heal, to grow, and to remember that once it was real. By his early 20s, Keith was already flirting with the contours of addiction. Fame amplified the chaos. Late nights blurred into lost mornings. Substances dulled the stress, and every high note on stage threatened a low point alone. By the time his American debut hit in 1999, Keith was a sensation. Magnetic, talented, unpredictable. Fans saw a heartthrob with a soulful voice and a rebellious edge. But backstage, he fought personal battles he rarely let anyone see. The cycle of achievement and excess left him drained. Even as the industry started to crown him a country superstar, Keith kept one uneasy eye on the possibility that it could all slip away. Nicole was healing in her own way. If fame had carved out her fortune, it had cost her dearly in private. The wounds from losing her first marriage and in so many ways her children shaped her view of love and trust. She rebuilt a celebrated Oscar win, critical acclaim, a reputation as one of the finest actresses of her generation. But beneath her graceful exterior was an undercurrent of longing. She wanted security, a family, something that could finally restore the sense of belonging she'd lost. For Nicole and Keith, the road to each other was paved with heartbreak, victories, and a shared yearning for renewal. From the outside, they seemed opposites. She, polished and strategic, an emblem of Hollywood's calculated dream. He, unpredictable, living on instinct and emotion, always running from something he couldn't quite name. Yet their burdens were what truly connected them. Nicole's fear of being controlled and abandoned existed alongside Keith's battle to tame his impulses. She wanted calm, he chased adrenaline. She craved order, he brought beautiful chaos. The spark that finally brought them together carried both promise and peril. Their famous first encounter unfolded at the G-Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, a night honoring Australians who'd made their mark abroad. Nicole, newly single, exuded the poise of someone who'd survived storms. Keith, already winning over America's radio stations, showed up carrying the weight of a man used to keeping secrets. When introductions were made, Nicole later confessed she couldn't tell if there was interest. Keith was warm but cautious, perhaps aware that anything real would take time to build. Despite exchanging numbers, months went by with little contact. Nicole assumed his silence was disinterest, not realizing that Keith's own insecurities and mindset kept him from reaching out. He later admitted he felt intimidated by her success and afraid he wouldn't measure up. Eventually it happened. Keith finally reached out, and their connection deepened quickly. Every conversation, every meeting, revealed not just attraction but recognition. They both saw reflections of their own vulnerabilities in each other. Their differences began to feel like complementary strengths, her steadiness meeting his spontaneity, his passion enlivening her routines. Their romance moved at a dizzying pace. Despite their contrasting upbringings and the risks of starting over with another public figure, Nicole and Keith's bond grew. Friends said Keith became a gentler, more focused man, and Nicole started to affect a calm she hadn't felt in years. But love for them was never simple. There were moments of awe, inspiring support, shared hope for family, dreams rekindled. But beneath it all, a tension. Nicole's desire for safety sometimes clashed with Keith's restless energy. For Nicole, the idea of loving another star was daunting. Her past with Tom Cruise left her wary. But what drew her to Keith was his honesty and fragility. He was flawed, yes, but sincere. It was not the flawless hero she needed, but someone whose rawness was matched only by his devotion. For Keith, Nicole's poise and achievements lit a fire. She was unshakable, someone who understood both adoration and the cost of public life. In her, Keith saw the possibility of a future not defined by self-sabotage or fleeting highs, but by real belonging. Many called them a fairy tale, but in truth, their love story was more complicated. A partnership built as much on shared struggle as on shared dreams. Their union was not about escaping the past, but learning to live with it. Both knew happiness couldn't erase old scars, but perhaps if they tended to each other, they could shape something strong enough to last. Yet the very forces that brought them together, his impetuousness, her quest for control, their inseparable histories, set the stage for future conflict. The world watched as they married, as red carpets and magazine spreads painted them in soft light. But under the glare, the real work of sustaining love had only just begun. Their journey, which almost never started, soon unfolded into a whirlwind. Nicole later admitted that if Keith hadn't reached out after months of silence, their story might have ended before it began. But when he finally took the chance, everything changed. From the moment they stepped into the public eye as a couple, the fascination was instant. This wasn't just another celebrity pairing. These were Australia's favorite children, one shaped by the rigor of Hollywood, the other by the raw spirit of country music, finding each other half a world away from home. Within months, snapshots of them together filled tabloids and late-night headlines. Nicole, always measured with her words, surprised fans by calling Keith the man who swept her off her feet, an admission that went beyond the usual glamour. For Nicole, the relationship was a kind of liberation. After years in a marriage, shadowed by scrutiny and strict control, Keith represented something wild and honest. He was unfiltered, deeply passionate, and vibrantly real in a way Nicole hadn't known. For him, her presence offered a sense of grounding. In Nicole, Keith found a woman whose art, poise, and discipline gave his chaos an anchor. The crescendo of their romance arrived in June 2006, just over a year after becoming a couple. They exchanged vows at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel, perched above the ocean on Sydney's Manly Peninsula. Nicole wore a Balenciaga gown with a sweeping veil that trailed behind her, while Keith's signature long hair gave him the air of a modern balladeer. The guest list sparkled with the biggest names: actors, singers, childhood friends. Yet beneath that dazzle, the ceremony was intimate. Nicole entered the chapel lit only by candles, her composure nearly slipping into tears. Later, as dusk fell over Sydney, Keith serenaded her in front of family and friends. To the outside world, it looked like both had finally found peace. Nicole, once confined by another's rules, was at last adored freely. Keith, long wounded by turmoil and public stumbles, seemed reborn in her embrace. But life is rarely as seamless as fairy tales. The honeymoon wasn't destined to last. Barely 4 months after their wedding, headlines blared the terrible news. Keith had checked himself into rehab for alcohol abuse. Nicole's fairy tale was replaced, almost overnight, by a fight for survival, not her own, but for the man she loved. For Nicole, the ordeal was a familiar cycle: public judgment, private heartbreak. She'd barely had time to finish her wedding thank-yous before being thrust into crisis mode. Instead of hiding or blaming, she chose fierce, unwavering loyalty. She frequented the clinic, stood by Keith through the unraveling, and offered the media nothing but dignified silence. Keith later credited her for saving his life, describing that period as the most profound test of love he'd ever known. But for those closest to them, it was clear. Nicole was driven by something deeper. Perhaps she was haunted by the feeling of helplessness that ended her first marriage, determined not to lose another partner to forces beyond her control. That fierce faith would become a defining feature of their marriage, a commitment to each other even through the worst storms. Somehow they rebuilt. Nicole dove back into her career. Blockbusters like Australia, critically acclaimed roles in Rabbit Hole. Keith embraced his place among country music's elite, touring relentlessly, picking up Grammys and dedicating new songs to the woman he called his muse. Publicly, they were inseparable. On red carpets, Nicole would sometimes describe Keith as the light that brought her back to life. He reciprocated, his acceptance speeches occasionally breaking into tears as he thanked her for standing by him when he had been at his lowest. Yet, beneath the surface, the struggle for stability never fully left. Keith's career meant months on tour. Nicole's film shoots sent her around the globe. They created a rule: never more than a few weeks apart, but work obligations broke it time and again. The stress wore at both of them, as did the ache of separation. Nicole, carrying the wounds of having lost primary custody of Isabel and Connor after her first marriage, held tightly to the promise of family. When she and Keith welcomed their first daughter, Sunday Rose, in 2008, Nicole threw herself into motherhood with all the intensity she once gave to acting. Their second daughter, Faith Margaret, arrived in 2010. The family grew, and together for a while, their new life seemed full of hope. Keith adored his daughters, but the push and pull between family and the demands of a headline act were always present. On stage, he poured his heart into music. Off stage, he sometimes struggled to bridge the gap between his restless spirit and domestic calm. For years, Nicole and Keith maintained their image as Hollywood's rare, enduring love story. But in private, it wasn't always easy. Their devotion was real, their affection visible, but tension lingered like the echo of old pain always threatening to return. They clung to each other through addiction, fame, distance, and the fierce pursuit of their individual dreams. Perhaps that is what made their story so riveting: the hope that love could conquer even the harshest realities, and the heartbreak when it could not. For years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban managed to convince the world theirs was a love untouched by fame's usual storms. Interviews glowed with praise, family photos radiated warmth, and their every public gesture seemed designed to reassure audiences that true love, real and lasting, could flourish even in the harshest spotlight. But beneath this dazzling image, their connection was quietly eroding. Keith's struggle with addiction lingered, casting its shadow across both their public appearances and private nights. Nicole's longing for routine and security could sometimes harden into a need for control, and those close to the couple whispered that their differences ran deep. Still, they pressed on. They fought for the fairy tale so many believed, moving quickly from the bursting thrill of new love and a whirlwind wedding to nearly 2 decades of shared triumph and pain. Their story was built on hope, but as years passed, it became clear how fragile hope could be. By their 10th anniversary, Nicole and Keith had weathered more hardship than most couples could in a lifetime. The early rehab crisis, the cross-continental separations, and the challenge of keeping a family together with two high-profile careers left marks that never fully faded. Yet, for years, they remained a symbol of endurance. Red carpets, award shows, and magazine spreads carefully curated to show unity. Nicole described Keith as her anchor. He called her his rock. But gradually, small cracks began to show through the facade. There were rumors of arguments about touring, worries over his sobriety, tension about Nicole's emotional intensity. Friends described the exhausting cycle. She admired Keith's artistry, but worried for his mental health. He loved her support but didn't want to feel rescued. Ultimately, what bound them together was the very thing that sometimes pulled them apart. Nicole treasured his vulnerability, even as she feared its consequences. Keith loved her strength, but felt in its shadow. To fans and the media, Nicole and Keith were an ideal. Their affection looked real because in many ways it was, but it became rarer, less spontaneous, more rehearsed. They spent much of their private energy propping up the myth that love would always conquer addiction, distance, and disappointment. Raising daughters only highlighted their differences. Nicole, shaped by her own fractured childhood, craved schedules, privacy, and resilience for Sunday and faith. Keith preferred spontaneity, music, and laughter. Insiders revealed that these weren't dramatic fights. They were quieter, persistent divides, eroding trust and intimacy in ways the public couldn't see. As the 2020s dawned, speculation increased. There were more solo appearances, more paparazzi shots with missing wedding bands, more pointed silence in interviews about each other. Nicole stressed that marriage required a lot of work, a hint of struggle behind the polished words. Keith insisted she remained his world, but the declaration sounded less like passion, more like routine. All unravelings have a tipping point. By the summer of 2025, the cracks had grown into rifts. Nicole poured herself into family and work. Keith disappeared into his tours and music. Insiders say there was no final argument or scandal, just a tired recognition that they could no longer carry both their marriage and their own well-being. Nicole eventually chose self-preservation over relentless caretaking. Keith, drained by the expectations, stepped away. Nicole filed for divorce in Davidson County, Tennessee, the family's longtime home, with straightforward paperwork but enormous implications. After 19 years, 2 daughters, and international fame, she walked away, often with Sunday and Faith at her side, her protective posture now a fixture of the photographs. She sought primary residential custody, a decision that Keith reportedly accepted. Understanding his unpredictable career made him less suited for day-to-day parenting. For Nicole, the loss of older children during her marriage to Tom Cruise left scars she refused to repeat. Her filings made clear the intent of stability for her daughters. Keith, while heartbroken, agreed. Fans and tabloids dissected every move. Nicole faced the renewed spotlight with composure, while Keith's first post-split concert became a public therapy session. No wedding ring, altered lyrics in breakup songs, and pointed absences of material tied to Nicole. The mythology had collapsed. The world divided into sides. Every lyric and every look became a battleground. Nicole retreated to family, focusing on healing. Keith leaned into his music, turning heartbreak into confessional art for the world to see. After nearly 2 decades of headlines, romance, and redemption, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's love story ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet, solemn parting. The words "irreconcilable differences" marked only the surface of a saga built on hope, risk, and the very real human need to be both loved and free. Their legacy is more than just a divorce. It's a reminder that fairy tales, especially the ones on camera, often conceal the complexity and labor beneath the surface. It's about learning to let go, prioritizing self-preservation, and finding strength in truth, even when myth would be easier. Thanks for joining us on this journey through one of Hollywood's most iconic romances. To watch more videos exploring the stories behind the headlines, just click the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for updates, so you never miss a new release.